There it goes. Red light. Well, it should give me a red light on the front. That's what the old one used to do. All right, I'm giving you information that I have never seen in another source. I've collected these sources. These come from other classes I've taught. I've just pulled them out because they're appropriate for Hebrew or for Torah class, because they talk about the veracity of the Old Testament documents, and specifically we're looking at the Torah. But remember, this is kind of the Tanakh and everything else mixed in when I talk about the Old Testament. So we went over what that Old Testament was, and Tammy said that I need to be clear about what I was talking about the oral Torah and the Torah. Try to draw that again. Let me see. I got another color. I got black, but because the question came up, you have the Torah. You have the Torah, and you have the Mishnah. The oral Torah and the Mishnah are not the same at all. They are not at all the same. They are not. Are they comparable? No, they're not. The Torah is written. The Mishnah is the oral Torah. This is what the Jewish people believe. Now, this is not in the Torah. So, one of the reasons I like to, you have to talk about the Mishnah. And the Mishnah, I brought a copy of the Talmud. Now, that is, I think, number 22 or so. So there's 22 books like that, and I don't think have all of them. The whole set is in the Library of Congress, you know. But the Mishnah, what happened is the Pharisees, remember, we have Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, Zealots, and Teen Hodos. So the Pharisees believe, Sadducees don't believe in this, don't trust this. The Zealots probably they do. Teen Hodos does, because we came out of the Pharisaic tradition. Well, no, not so much. We don't even talk about it. Okay, let me see if I can explain this correctly. The Pharisees believe that when God gave Moses the Torah, remember, and we'll talk about this, we'll get to this, we'll talk about this in more clarity when we get to the Torah, part of the Torah, we get into the Torah. But when God gave the Torah to Moses, how did he give it to him? Do you remember? On stone tablet. Well, you are correct. It says in the Old Testament, it says in the Torah that Moses brought down the Torah. He brought down the word. And we'll get to why that means the Torah. But in any case, remember the first time he brought it down, Moses broke the tablets. He went back up, and God made him do it. Instead of God doing it, this time he made Moses do it. So pain and suffering for Moses. For 40 days and 40 nights, he was up in the mountains chiseling out the Torah. Poor guy. The Pharisees, not the other, we can talk about the other sects of Judaism. But the Pharisees believed that at the same time that God gave Moses the Torah, he also gave him the oral Torah, the Mishnah. The oral Torah was not written down. The presumption is that when Moses is chiseling out the scroll, chiseling out the tablets, God is also giving him a commentary on what he's writing, right? Maybe it was one of the angels giving him a commentary. I don't know. The Pharisees believed that the Mishnah was given, and it's a separate document. It's called the oral Torah. It's called the oral Torah. But is it the same as the Torah? No, not at all. It's nothing like the Torah. It's basically a commentary on the Torah. Remember I told you, the oral Torah allows the Pharisees, the rabbis, to make judgments on the Torah. Remember, can the Torah ever change? No. Never. But they make commentary from the Talmud is from the oral Torah. Can the oral Torah change, theoretically? Yes. Well, Jews would say it can't change, but because it's not written, it therefore can be, commentated on, right? I can commentate on it. So I want to be clear about this because, remember I told you, there is a serious problem if you say that the Torah is passed orally. We'll get into that when we talk about it, but there is a serious philosophical and theological problem you have. And think about it a little bit because it's a very good thing to think about. But I'm going to show you something that I don't think any other author or any other historian ever shows. I've never seen it in any other literature. I haven't published any papers on this. I've published some other papers on other things in the Old Testament, but not specifically on this. But usually people, very rarely people will compare ancient manuscripts, but I've never seen anyone compare religious manuscripts. So these are the manuscripts of every religion pretty much that exists. So you have, and these are, I don't include the New Testament, I'm including the Old Testament. We know the New Testament documents are wonderful. Historically, they pass every test. Pass every test better than anything. And what I did in your cheat sheets, in the Gouge notes, in the note pages, I worked for an hour to get this thing so it would fit. And hopefully it will give you some good information. I left in some of the gospel. I cleaned out some of the stuff. But I left in all the major documents, and I also gave the specifics of major documents. We'll look at that too when we get there. I just want to make sure, okay, so we have the Old Testament, Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic text, the Septuagint. And you can see the dates and the copies for each of those. We talked about that. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, it does not claim to be historical. They're spells you use for when you're dead. I'm going to give you an example of them. Matter of fact, when we get to the point where we talk about ancient documents, I'm going to give you some examples. I'll read you some examples of translations of the ancient documents, and you can get an idea, a flavor, because what we're going to talk about next, basically, is the internal test, right? We did the bibliographical test, and our conclusion on, I said it was fortunate, but it's unfortunate because it's not like the New Testament. The New Testament, you can prove, is magnitudes better than any other historical document in antiquity. The Old Testament documents, or the Torah specifically, you can only prove it is equal. It's good as, right? And that is a problem. It's something we have to acknowledge and we have to recognize because it puts it on a very similar plane. But what I'm going to do is show you from the internal tests and historical information why it's different. So let's talk about it just a little bit. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, I think we can check that off. There's only 9 copies. Every copy is different. I don't know if people came back from the dead and said the spells didn't work, or they said we need to bury them. But we have 9 copies. They were all found in sarcophagi, and they are all different, which is bad. Because let's say you got the wrong copy, you're toast. Zoroastrianism claims to be historical. I'm going to read you a little bit from it. There are 4 copies. They are very variant. Each one is variant. Shintoism is modern. It claims to be history. It's not really history. Anyone ever read Shinto documents? I'll read you an example. Very modern. They claim to be historical, but we'll see. Hinduism claims to be historical. They're many variant. They're not any cohesive. Written about 500 BC, so are they historical? I've got some examples. We'll see. Buddhism claim to be historical documents. They're many variant. They were written mostly 100 plus years after Buddha, and we're not even sure what Buddha is Buddha, but whatever. They do claim to be historical. Jainism are philosophical, theological documents. There's many variant. They don't claim to be historical. Confucianism does not claim to be historical. There are a few fragments because one of the emperors in Japan destroyed the library of the Confucian documents, but they're documents of theology and philosophy. Taoism is not historical. There is one, and it's kind of old, but we only have a copy. There's no documents, actual documents. Islam claims historical, but anyone ever read the Quran? Yeah, there is very little history. The history in the Quran is the same same as the history in the Old Testament, pretty much. Yeah, it's different, but it claims to be history. But how did old Muhammad see all that stuff way back in Moses, right? Moses is the primary source, but Muhammad, unless he's a time traveler, wasn't. In most of Islam is mostly it claims to be history, but it's mostly a theological document. It is a modern source document. In matter of fact, that is where antiquity ends. 600 AD, because we do have some copies, 3 copies of the Quran. By the way, they're all variant, and they're all different. And apparently, old Muhammad couldn't remember what he said from day to day, so there's an issue with that, too.
Well, when he had his spells or visions, like, and his followers who were around would try to write it on whatever they could, even if it was a leaf or something that would fall apart, or they tried to memorize it. So when they tried to put it all together after his death, there was, all sorts of different kind of variants, and they had like 24 different Qurans at one point, and then the leader at that point just burned all the other ones and kept the one.
Yeah. Well, there are 3, and you're correct. The biggest problem with old Muhammad, though, is at different times in his life, he recited his own documents differently. And he wasn't literate. One sect of Islam says he was literate, but it's obvious he wasn't, if you look historically. Because there's lots of evidence that he was, remember, you didn't write, no one who was literate wrote stuff for themselves, so that's why the question of was he literate or not, right? Because in the ancient world, you didn't write your own stuff. Paul did not write any of his own letters. He called a Libreus to come do it. So we've talked about that in Hebrews a lot. So anyway, so that's, so you can't be too mean on Muhammad, but he was writing about history that he never saw, which is Sans Josephus. Sikhism are all modern. It does not claim to be history. Baha'i is the same way. Mormonism claims to be history, but there are no documents. There's no copies. Remember, it was brought by Moroni to Joseph Smith, who was given magic glasses first so he could translate, and then he lost the glasses, lost first copy, so next time Moroni came and gave him a hat. Whether the hat or the glasses were a better translational source, we don't know, but we don't have any copies of the documents, and the span is 400 years, and the earliest is 1830 because it's a modern document, but it's written, supposedly written in 600 BC. Just saying. We're talking magic here. Anyway, so with a comparison of ancient documents, let's move on. We talked about the bibliographical test. Remember, it only defines how well the work reflects the original. It doesn't define the veracity, historicity of the original text. Use the internal and external tests to establish the veracity, the historical validity of the text. So that's what we're going to do next. That's what we're doing next. The question you probably have, right? Why are there so few Old Testament manuscripts? Because the Jewish people held documents in high esteem. The reason that we don't have so many manuscripts is because they replaced them whole when they wore out. Okay, I'm going to show you more of this, but you see what they did? This is what they do today. Let's say you're a rabbi and you have your synagogue, and your Torah scroll is getting ragged. What do you do? You call in the shafar. You call in the scribes. Remember scribes and Pharisees? The scribes are the guys who wrote these. So you call the scribes, and the scribes take your manuscript, your Torah scroll, because it's a manuscript. What's a manuscript? It's not Xerox made. It's hand done. And the scribe copies it every page and makes you a new scroll. And when the new scroll is complete and checked and tested, the next thing they do is they destroy the old one. They burn it. That's why we only have 16 fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because the Dead Sea Scroll folks, probably Essenes or Zealots, what did they expect to do later? Come back and get them, right? They're going to come back and get their scrolls. But what happened? Yeah, they got croaked. They're dead. We don't know if the Romans, Scythians, take your pick. Who killed them? Maybe the Judeans killed them. But they were croaked, and so they couldn't come back with their scrolls. And that's the reason we have those scrolls. Also, there are other texts and stuff we found, Nag Hammadi, for example. Nag Hammadi does not, remember, Nag Hammadi does not include any Old Testament and no New Testament non-Gnostic documents. So there was a scribe occupation developed to ensure accurate copying. It is unique to the Hebrew culture. There is a Libraeus, remember, in Greek culture, but the Libraeus purpose was not necessarily to copy documents. Libraeus purpose is to make documents, right? To write them for you. A scribe's purpose is to copy documents. Now, they also made them. The reason, and how do we get this, okay? Scribe sephar. It means, and I gave you the definition last week, it's in your thing. Sephar means literally to score with a mark as a tally or record, to inscribe, to enumerate, intentionally to recount. And it's translated commune, count, declare. How you get commune and declare, I have no idea, but in the King James. But a scribe, tallies records to enumerate, and we'll talk about this specifically. You know, I told you this, remember the very first class. What are their numbers? Their numbers are letters, right, and they have no vowels. So if every consonant has a value, what can I do? My computer scientist guys. There's no computer science? Any programmers? Anybody doing a computational check? What do they call that check? The CRC check? Computational. What do? I add up all the numbers in the program, and then I compare them at the bottom. If they have the same numerical value, then I know that the copy was good. Guess what I can do with a page in the Torah? I add up all the consonants. If the add of the consonants is correct, then I probably copied it correctly, right? Yes, sir?
When you say add up, you mean count or what?
No. It's just like I do with a computer program. So, okay. Like this symbol, let's say, means 100. And this symbol means 1. And this symbol means 2. And this symbol means 3 or 13. So I have 100, 1, 2, and 13. So I get something like 116, right? That means I properly, and if I add every consonant on the page and come out with the correct number, then I added correctly, right?
You're talking about the original is the copy.
Yeah, right?
So today they would assign a number to an H.
An H has a number. Well, not binary. In Hebrew, the letter H is the number.
Yeah, you pushed the button when you went over to the word.
The letter H is the number what? A, B, C, D, E, F, H. It's number 8, right? So in Hebrew, the H, whatever the H is, symbol, and I usually gave it to you in class, I didn't do this class, the H symbol is 8, right? The J is I, or is 9. You know, it goes on and on. So and see, this is a problem with numbers. Remember I told you the problem with numbers, right? You think there's a problem with numbers? If the constants are numbers and I'm reading along, what's your question?
Is it a number or a word?
Is it a number or word? Exactly. All the consonants in Hebrew are numbers. So if I add them all up, it's really cool because does anyone see? You know, I haven't touched a theological pool in a long time. Does anybody see a theological pool issue here or thing? Why would all their numbers be like letters? They're the only culture I know of that did that. There are other cultures that had numbers, letters were numbers, right? Or numbers were letters. Well, Romans kind of not, because the sequences, the way it did it, were different. But you're correct. So letters and numbers in many cultures, not many, in a lot of cultures can be similar. But the fact they had no vowels and all consonants, and the fact that they used them to ensure copying was correct is very unique. Romans didn't do that. Greeks didn't do that. Nobody did that except the Hebrews. they did it because of the scribes. Counting is the critical work of the scribe. Counting is important, but the counting is even more important. Mathematics is a huge important deal in this. This occupation was necessary for writing phylacteries. Remember what phylacteries are? The thing on your head. They misinterpreted, I think, the scripture that says, remember, Hebrew is super euphemistic. But if God said, put the word of God on your forehead and on your arm, they did it literally, but it was euphemistic. Remember, Hebrew is very euphemistic. But if you interpret it not euphemistically, but concretely like the Greeks did, then you can get these issues. Remember, it was the Pharisees that did that. So to write phylacteries and also agreements, marriage agreements. The Hebrews wrote marriage agreements, which is very interesting because it's not necessarily unique, but it is unique for the average person. It's very interesting that they had marriage agreements. Did you have a question?
All right, how do you count if you don't have letter numbers? Were they doing just slashes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slash?
No, you do just like the Romans did. So the Romans, I1, II, III, IV, 4, V, 5. So, these are letters that are numbers and other societies do the same thing. The problem with Hebrew is that they have, it's not slash, slash, slash. It's 3 totally different symbols to represent 1, 2, and 3, right?
How many letters do they have?
I think 34, something like that. I used to get,
That's for consonants.
those are all constants, and each constant like the 34. So
What do you write after that?
then you begin to put, that is a problem that we have. There's a problem we have because what do you do, right? If you have, in the English language, if you do 26tional text, 26tional, right? A is 1, B is 2, up to Z, which is 26, right? What do you do next? Well, there is a problem with that, and we don't know. There is a problem with a lot of the numbers in early Hebrew texts, because what did they do? We know what they do today, right? Today they use Arabic numbers. They dumped it. In the past, what did they do? Well, we're not sure. Did they go to, is 134 4 24s, or 4 25s? You take 4 25s and put them in front, and then put a 34 afterwards, right? Or do you do 1 0 or 1 3 4, right? A 1 and a 3 4, an elf symbol, and then the 34 symbol, and have 100. Or do you do the 25, 20, 25, 25, 25, 25, and then 34 symbol, right?
The 1 and then the 3 and the 4.
Or see, can a group that thinks in terms of constants as numbers write a 1, a 3, and a 4 to be 134? No, they can't. It's impossible. So most likely, but see, here's the problem. How many different ways can I make 134 from 1 to 34 by adding? Yeah, permutations and the permutations and computations, the permutations and permutations, whatever. Remember that stuff you used to do when you were in school and they made you figure that stuff out? It's a power. It's an x to the n. It's a powerful thing. It's like bazillions. So this is a problem you have with numbers. And we'll get to it, but one of the external problems that you will confront, what is the number one, well, maybe not number one, well, number one, pretty much the number one thing that anti-apologists, anti-Christian, anti-biblical, anti-Jewish apologists say about the Old Testament documents?
It's not consistent.
The numbers are not consistent between documents. Right? The numbers are not consistent in some cases within the documents. Do you see why? If you understand Hebrew to figure out the numbers. And okay, how many years are we talking about? We're talking about 1,500 to 432. Do you think the way they did numbers changed in 1,000 years? 2,000. Well, this is BC. BC to BC. So, you think it changed? Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, it probably changed from not scribe to scribe, but from writer to writer, right? And so the problem, and not only writer to writer, okay. When did we first? Okay. Today, you pick a dictionary up off of a table, and you're supposed to spell according to the American dictionary. Do the Brits spell differently?
Yes.
Okay, even worse. When did we first get the first dictionary? Do you know who did it? No, not Daniel. No, it was Johnson. It was Johnson, the British student, and but it was so full of irony and satire that nobody would use it. But he tried to make the words, people have been trying for years to make sure that people spell the words the same, right? We only, in modern era, and that was about 1820, I think. When was Webster doing his thing? About 18?
About that time.
About that time, yeah. Because he was a reaction.
Some involvement with the American Revolution. He was involved with the American Revolution.
Boswell and Johnson, right? Remember Boswell and Johnson? Johnson was a big, fat, funny guy, and Boswell was his, sidekick, right? His straight man, yeah. Well, it's hard to tell who was more funny. But anyway, Boswell wanted to write a funny, sarcastic dictionary. Webster wanted to make the language, you want everybody to write the same so that people can understand what you're writing, right? And also give us something to study in school. So that's how we got, and that was the 1820s. So what does that mean about Hebrew texts? Was the spelling consistent? Was he?
I remember looking at some English texts from the 1600s and stuff, looking for genealogy, for my ancestors and stuff.
Yeah.
And they, in their wills, they mention other family members, so wills are important. But the spelling is crazy, and the spelling of people's last names, in the same family, there's 15 different ways to spell it, and it was never consistent. So.
Plus, we got rid of 2 consonants in English that we had. Anybody know what these consonants are? These are very important consonants in English. This is F, and this is thorn. What's the difference? This is a hard TH. The. This is soft TH. Thomas, yeah. And so in English, we used to have 2 consonants that we dumped. We dumped them in pretty early, but they're Anglo-Saxon and they were used. And by the way, the reason thorn is so important is, you ever heard of ye old shop or something like that? That's because they miswrote Thorna. A Thorna that's miswritten looks like a Y. And so it was the old, right? But it's a miswriting of the Thorna, because when Thorna came out of usage in the Middle Ages, around Shakespeare's time, they misspelled it, and so that's why it says ye old curate. Anyway, the point is, languages change. Spellings change. The use of numbers is a critical function or factor in Hebrew texts. So if you look at, I have the example I passed around, the Hebrew text. It's a page, and if you look at it, think about that each of those consonants, and I don't think those have vowel pointlets in it. Anyway, so the scribe developed very early in Jewish culture. It was required for the basic practice of the covenants. The covenants. Remember the covenants? We'll talk about covenants. We're not going to get covenants today. But marriage is considered a covenant, right? And we'll talk about covenants. But the scribes were developed because of the practice of the covenant. Because of contracts. We call them contracts today, but the scribes did contracts. And okay, cultures that use a culture that has every consonant being a number, what is that culture probably focused in, or lists, numbers, yeah, money, finances, right? So, okay, is it any surprise that in the medieval era, well, is it any surprise that who was the greatest financiers and bankers in the world? The Jewish people, because their culture and their society is so focused in numbers. And the point of the scribe was to count and add numbers. This is way different. Remember, and I didn't get to tell you this, but I'll tell you it now. Remember, why the euphemism in Hebrew, 40 days and 40 nights? What does 40 represent? The max fingers and toes. If Brett and I want to make a deal, right, and he's the merchant and I'm the seller, then together we can count to 40, because together we have 40 fingers and toes. Guess what? The average person could not count above 40. In fact, the average person in the ancient world could not count above 20 by themselves. Because all they had was, you got 10 and 10. That's it. And if you have a disfigurement or problem, you got even worse problems. And it becomes worse in Hebrew because, okay, if you can write the language, right? Every man or boy was supposed to have memorized the Torah, so theoretically they could write. But how hard is it to write to 40 and above? You get the point? So when they said 40 days and 40 nights, that is a euphemistic statement in Hebrew meaning a long period of time. So long that I can't count it. The reason we have 60, why do we have base 60? Because in Zoroastrianism, remember Zoroastrianism invented by the Babylonians? Zoroastrianism in about 600 BC, those crazy Babylonians said, we don't do any arrangements, so if you're the merchant and I'm the seller, we got to have a priest. Dave's got to be our priest to make sure we do it right by the king's law and the sacrificial law. So therefore, now I can count to 60. So guess what? What is the basis for all of our time? 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, because of, 60 minutes an hour because of Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism was a time-based and a priest-based cultural religion that required the use of time and also of the priest to be able to enact all social discourse, all financial discourse. The reason Babylon doesn't exist today is probably because of it. Just think, one person, two people can do a good deal, but if you had to always have a priest there to help you make your deal.
Your notary.
Oh yeah, notaries. Oh yeah. Maybe we should start calling priests, right? Anyway, the phylactery is writing specifically required by Mosaic law. We'll look at Mosaic law. It requires certain things to be written down, including marriage covenants and other arrangements. We'll see that when we look at the law. It required legal practice for their society, titles, marriage, and other contracts. It solidified during the synagogue development phase. And I'm not going to talk about that today because that'll get way too much. But anyway, it was required to ensure the accurate writing of the Old Testament documents, right? Because, and here we get to it. Okay, here's a scribe, shofar. It means to count. It's the key function of the scribe. To count the number of the words on the page of text, know the value of the page of the text. Right? So 1, 34, 26, I add them all up on a page, and I add them together, and that way I know that a page of text is correct. As a matter of fact, we'll get to that. Masoretes are the direct legacy of the scribe. The Masoretic tradition is called the Masorah tradition. And you notice the word Masorah? That was the word of the day last week. Masorah means a band. A band. Not a band like, not a music band, but a band, in other words, a covenant group. A group that banded together for the purpose of keeping the traditions alive. They did it from 600 to 900 AD. This is AD thing. At that time, they improved the page counting system. They developed the vowel pointing system, the pointlets. They recorded scribal rules for copying. And here are the scribal rules. Now, We don't have a record of the scribal rules for counting from the ancient time. Why? They didn't write them
I was
down.
gonna say when writing was expensive and difficult, why would you write?
Bingo, exactly. It was handed down as tradition. But the Masoretes finally wrote it down. Because the Masoretes wrote it down, we know that this is the way. Okay, now, when did it develop? It probably developed sometime around, and I didn't want to get into this. We'll get into this more later. But what's the time? Anybody remember offhand the time of the first when the kingdom separated, right? That was around, I think, about 1000 BC. Is that about right? 1000 BC. And then right after that was the Assyrian conquest. The Assyrian,
Not right after that.
about, what,
It's
800?
not in the 600s.
Maybe 600, 600. I'll give 600. I think it was further away.
600s.
It's more in the middle.
Because it wasn't,
Well, when was the Babylonian conquest?
586.
586. 586. So this has to be earlier because the Assyrians were way earlier. They were at least, I'm going to say 800 still. Because we know the synagogue system was probably intact by 586 during the Babylonian conquest and the second diaspora. First diaspora was the Assyrian diaspora. We'll get into some of this later on. The point is the synagogue system was probably pretty strong in about, I'm going to say this. I'm a late date guy, early date guy, so I'd say about 800 or so. I didn't look back at my text. I don't have my notes. But anyway,
I'm looking it up.
you're looking at,
I think
Is
it's
that
around
because they
930.
what's that?
930 was when I split.
Ooh, 930 sounds about right. I'll go with
The
930.
first page, no, they're saying 700s, like around 740 was the first date that I found. I'm trying to confirm.
Succession of Solomon's son around 930 is the biblical account of this.
Yeah, 930, 1,000? Ooh, I was pretty
Did
close.
you say that was
That's
right?
pretty close.
It
Pretty
happened
good.
way after Rehoboam.
The biblical account reports that the country split into two kingdoms.
Oh, that's when it's, okay.
The
we're
kingdom
talking about a
split,
different
and
thing.
then the Assyrians, I think around 800 BC. If it's 740, I'll take that. That's pretty good, right? That's a pretty good guess. But the synagogues, we'll talk more about synagogue system. We'll get to that. Remember, in the reading today, you saw what it was? The rabbinic thing I told you about? John said, there's the Lamb of God, and what did his disciples do? They followed him. This is the way the rabbinic thing worked, right? So you're walking with your rabbi, and your rabbi thinks you're ready for the next level. And he goes, remember that rabbi I talked about Gamaliel? And you go, oh, yeah, cool. So you follow Gamaliel. And if the Gamaliel would say, why do you follow me? And he said, we want to learn from you, master, right? And so if he let you in his home, right, then you were accepted as his student. And then you were trained by Gamaliel. Anyway, that's the way it worked. And so Jesus, in that time, the expression in the New Testament is the exact same of the rabbinic kind of training. Anyway, so in a synagogue scroll, written on the skin of a clean animal, kosher animal, prepared by a Jew, fastened together with strings from clean animals, lined and spaced together, each page a set number of columns. Why?
They would check, they check the beginning letter and the ending letter too, to make sure that the right. I think it's like a grid.
Well, it makes, okay, if I work with an Excel spreadsheet as opposed to a Word document, right? If a Word document is really hard, but if I have an Excel spreadsheet, and by the way, the Japanese write this way too. So cultures that write with characters do that. But yeah, it makes it easier to see the columns and count the numbers and stuff. The length of each volume must extend not less than 48 lines and not more than 60 lines, and the breadth must consist of 30 letters. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Do you see this? I put up my spreadsheet, and I can add them. I can add them any way I want. And if I add them this way, they should come out with the same number if I add them this way, right? This is cool stuff. The Talmudic rules for the copyists. These are from the Masoretes. Sit in full Jewish dress, wash the whole body, not begin to write the name of God with a pen newly dipped in ink. Should a king address you while writing the name of God, you must take no notice. We'll talk about the names of God later in another class. If a mistake were made in the copying, you're not allowed to erase or cross it out. You got to throw the ruined page away and start anew. The Masoretes wrote this down but we believe that this is what the rules always were, right? Now, when did they become in action? I'm telling you, by about the time of this, when the synagogues were established, so at least about 600 BC, probably about 800 BC, this system was in place to ensure that the writing of the scrolls was correct. To the point that, remember, when did Jehoshaphat find the documents in the temple? That was probably about Josiah. Remember Josiah found the documents, the Tanakh? They found it? Right. That was around a little bit earlier than this. So we know that the documents were good because by that time, what had they done? They had been copying the documents righteously, rigorously, right? So they had good documents by the time of Josiah.
About 640 BC.
There you go, 640. Woo. Pretty close, pretty close. The Talmudic rules for copying, the whole must be lined for, you gotta line it, like an Excel spreadsheet. If 3 words are written without, a copy must be discarded. So in other words, you have to line it. You have to put lines on it. If you don't put the lines on it, you start writing, you have to throw it out. The ink must be black, made with a special recipe. The transcriber not deviate at least the least from the original. No word or letter, not even a yod. A yod is a mark, a consonant mark, from memory. You do it from memory. You have to look at each word before writing. Between a consonant, a space of a hair. And it was, the spaces are columns anyway. Between a paragraph or section, a 9-letter space. Between every book, 3 lines. The 3 lines in the books, the paragraphs, there are no paragraphs or sections in the Torah or in the Tanakh. But the Masoretes allowed it. This, in a modern synagogue scroll allows it. The 5th book of Moses, the last book in the Torah, must terminate with a line. So the comparison of the Masoretic manuscripts and the Dead Sea Scrolls show almost total agreement. We have 2 copies of Isaiah and the Dead Sea manuscripts. We're going to have 16 fragments. 2 of them are of Isaiah. They're word for word identical in more than 95% of the text. There is a 5% variation, chiefly of obvious slips of the pen and variations in spelling. Right? Spelling. Where's the dictionary? They didn't have one. So, anyway.
But if they were copying without doing it from memory, looking at every word, why wouldn't they just copy it the exact same way it was before?
They're supposed to, but we're talking between the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the Dead Sea Scrolls was about, what did I say about those documents around, I think it's 300. We're talking about 300 to 500, 300 BC to 500 AD.
That's a very slight amount of deviation for that amount of time.
Yeah, you got to realize, remember the Masoretic, there are 24,000 texts of the New Testament. We take the best and the majority text. The majority text, there is variation between every book of the New Testament in every copy we have. Because the copiers of the New Testament did not follow the scribal Sephar requirements of the Old Testament. So what I'm telling you is this is almost 1,000 years. That's not bad.
It's extremely consistent considering the amount of time between.
I mean, talk about, you're doing telephone with documents, and yet your telephone comments are 95% accurate, and the differences are variations in spelling. And we'll talk about those, like read and read. It doesn't say Red Sea, it says Reed Sea, for example. It's not a long sleeve coat. I mean, it's not a coat of many colors, it's a long sleeve coat in Joseph. So, variations in spelling lead to very small deviations. And actually, the coat of many colors makes no sense in Hebrew, but a long sleeve coat makes great sense in Hebrew based on the Joseph count. So anyway, the comparison to the Septuagint manuscripts to the Dead Sea Scrolls show almost total agreement. Now, Septuagint is a translation in Greek, but that's interesting, isn't it? Why is that? Well, Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls are almost the same time period, right? The Masoretic documents are way later. By the way, almost all of our Old Testament Tanakh. All of our Old Testament translations come from, they used to be almost all Septuagint. I'll go with that. But most of them today come from the Masoretic text. And we've just the first Bible to do it may have been the New American Standard, which finally took the older documents. What was the first one that said, and a young woman shall conceive in Isaiah?
Revised Standard.
It's Revised Standard did that. And that is Beulah. It's totally mistranslated. A Beulah in Hebrew means an unmarried woman, which is presumed to be a virgin, right? So literally in Greek, it's not a Parthenos. A Parthenos is a virgin in Greek, because the Hebrews presumed that an unmarried woman would be a virgin, where the Greeks didn't. It's a cultural thing. But yet our translators today want to change the verbiage because, well, they're not very culturally aware, I think. It's just a translation issue we talk about all the time. Anyway, based on the concept of the scribe in Hebrew culture, based on the concept of the scribe, the unique role that's not found in any other society, which drove the entire view of literature and documents, that means, you see this? The history critical of the Hebrew law and the culture, societal need to record events, religious need to record events, personal need to record events. Bibliographical, very similar to historical antiquity, which means the Torah and the Tanakh are significantly better than other religious works. Why? Why?
Standard of accuracy.
Was that?
They seem to have a standard of accuracy.
Yeah, they had a standard of accuracy. Do other religions that you know of have any other standard of accuracy for the copy of their manuscripts? No, not in history. That's not the way it was done, right? Partially because a lot of it wasn't history, but most of it because it was philosophy, right? So, and this is why this isn't a bumper sticker. You can't just throw this out to if you're having an argument with somebody who's trying, an anti-Jewish document, anti-Christian kind of person, it's really difficult to get them to this point. But the point that you need to know is how accurate are the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and the Torah documents? They don't meet the bibliographical test because they destroyed their old documents and ensured that the Safar gave them good copies, right? It's like you doing a Xerox copy of the document that you have to make sure it's good, and then checking it twice, and then burning the original copy, right? That's what they did over time. So what we're talking about is a cultural phenomena that allows us to understand that these documents are good historical documents. I'll give you that warning, though, remember? The primary source, we talk about merit and primacy of source. So therefore, the problem we have, and we've got to acknowledge it all the time, is if it wasn't an eyewitness or a secondary witness, what's the problem? Lack of internal contradictions, cohesive, comprehensive. This is an internal test. Lack of internal contradictions, cohesiveness, and comprehensible degree of the witness, primary, secondary, tertiary. Is it geographically? Is it chronologically placed in historical claims? Does it claim to be myth or fiction or opinion? Okay, or history. So, for example, the Book of Mormon. Has anyone ever found any of the places mentioned in the Book of Mormon?
Not only that, but it actually contradicts stuff.
The Book of Mormon, none of the places, as a matter of fact, one of the great Tübingen School, I won't get into Tübingen School, maybe talk about it at some point, but one of the great Tübingen School arguments was, there is no Babylon. We can't find Babylon. And archaeology then found Babylon, right? They said the same thing about the Odyssey and the Iliad. We can't find Troy, and then they found Troy. So the deal here is that, for example, in Mormon documents, the documents that Joseph Smith wrote, he didn't even get Plymouth right, because Plymouth's not even there. Anyway, there is no correlation with the historical point. So when you look at internal contradictions, and that maybe is an external test, I'm sorry, the cohesiveness and comprehensibility, the degree of witness, primary, eyewitness, secondary, it was an eyewitness, it's a record from an eyewitness, tertiary, There's no eyewitness at all. Geographically placed. Was it written where it was written? Chronologically. Is it within that span, the bibliographical test? And again, the historical claims. So, this is critical, and you've got to recognize this. We'll talk about it when we get into things about covenants and stuff. Lack of internal contradictions. Many other works in antiquity have serious problems in this area. The Old Testament works display a few evident internal contradictions. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Cohesive and comprehensible. Many works in antiquity are neither, and this is what examples I want to give you. The Old Testament documents are, anybody read the Old Testament? Right? I can understand it. It's easy to understand. And the degree of witness. So let me see. Okay, here's a list. We'll probably have to continue next week, but let's see. I thought you'd like to hear some works. So, the Book of the Dead. Egyptian Book of the Dead, collection of hymns and spells of the dead. You gotta be dead. Here's 1:1. A hymn of praise to Ra when he riseth in the eastern part of heaven. Behold, Osiris Ade, the scribe who recordeth the holy offerings of all the gods, who saith, Homage to thee, O thou who hast come, as Kepra, the creator of the gods. Thou risest, thou shinest, making bright thy mother Nut, crowned king of the gods. Thy mother Nut doth homage unto thee, and both her hands in the land of Manu receiveth thee with content. And that's enough. The point is, it's somebody writing about what the gods were doing, or about gods. Gods being gods, right? Not God's action in the world at all. But it's a hymn to be used, or it's a spell to be used when you're dead. So it doesn't do you any good to even do it, but that's the Book of the Dead. Zoroastrianism, let's see, Zoroastrianism, the Zendavesta, I got it right up there, the Zendavesta, let me go to the next page. Next page is the...
At the bottom of the page, I think.
There we are. Yeah, these are historical works, known historical works, proven historical works. I put it toward the top. We're going to compare the religious documents. So and this is what I put on the chart. I've cut off some, but the Zoroastrianism, I'm not going to go, I have another class I teach to other groups about each of the religious documents, so we go over them, the manuscripts and stuff. But I just thought you'd like to hear. Let's see, where's my Zoroastrianism? Okay. The first object of man is purity. Yod-Zu purity is for man. Next to life, the greatest good. Impurity or uncleanness may be described as the state of a person or thing that is possessed of the demon, and the object of purification is to expel the demon. The principal means by which uncleanness enters man is death, as death is the triumph of the demon. When a man dies, as soon as the soul has parted from the body, the drug nasu, or the corpse drug, falls upon the dead from the regions of hell, and whoever henceforth touches the corpse becomes unclean, and makes unclean whomsoever he touches. The drug is expelled from the dead by means of the shagdig, the look of the dog. A four-eyed dog, or a white one with yellow ears, is brought near the body, and is made to look at the dead. As soon as he has done so, the drug flees back into hell. Okay. Cool. Yeah. The Paveti text of the Zostas, Bundes, the creation myth. In the beginning was God, is the Old Testament. In the name of the Creator, Azamazet. The Zand Aknis, the Zand knowing or tradition forming, which is the first about Azara's original creation and the antagonism of the evil spirit, and afterwards about the nature of the creatures from the original creation until the end, which is the future existence, the Pavitaso, as revealed by the religion of the Mazdalians. So it was declared the Amazrad is the supreme in omniscience and goodness, and is unrivaled in splendor. The region of light is the place of Amazrad, which they call endless light. I've read almost every ancient document, whether religious or non-religious, that you can get in antiquity, and I can assure you that almost every document in antiquity that is religious is barely comprehensible by anyone. Even if you study it for your whole life, you would probably have problems trying to comprehend exactly what it's saying. As opposed, and sometimes we think that the Old Testament is difficult. This stuff is incomprehensible. That's why one of the internal tests is comprehensibility. Here's Shintoism. Shintoism is a modern document. Here's what it says. The beginning of heaven and earth, section 1. The names of the deities that were born in the plane of the high heaven, when the heaven and earth began, were the deity master, the august center of the heaven. Next, the high august producing wondrous deity. Next, the divine producing wondrous deity. Now, who saw this? Next three deities, maybe God saw it and wrote it down for them. These three deities were all deities born alone and hid their persons. The names of the deities that were born next from a thing that sprouted up like into a reed shoot when the earth, young and like into floating oil, drifted about Medusa-like, were the pleasant reed shoot prince elder deity, next the heavenly, eternally standing deity. These two deities were likewise born alone and hid their persons. The five deities in the above list are separate heavenly deities. Shintoism claims to be a creation myth, but it's supposed to be a historically based myth. About 600 AD is when this stuff happened. I wasn't around in 600 AD, but I don't think this happened. I'm just saying. There's some other stuff, a little bit of graphical Shintoism. The Hindu Vedas. There are lots. There's the Rig, Sama, Gavur, the Avara. They were composed around 1500 BC by tradition. But remember, they didn't have a codified system of scribes, so we don't know if they're quite accurate. But for example, here's the Rig Veda. It's hymns to various gods. So they're hymns. I could read them, but who cares? They're hymns to gods. Hymns used by the priests of the Sama. So they're not really historical. The Vedas, preparation for the sacrifice, consecration of the sacrifice to the place of the sacrifice after Shukal, they could be considered similar to the Torah, and we'll see about that. We'll compare that. The Vedas, the buying of the Soma sacrifice. The Vedas, let's see, the charm against charms, Upanishads. Let me see, I want to get to the Bhagavad Gita. Time's up. Bhagavad Gita. Anyway, I guess I can continue next time. We can look at some others. The Bhagavad Gita is the epics. So, there's a lot of Hindu documents, but most of them are documents that we wouldn't consider, you could consider them like the Psalms, right? Psalms or, Proverbs, maybe something like that. They have cultural relevance to their culture, but what relevance do they have? And, we're not going to really study the Psalms, but anyway, there is depth in that, too, to look at. But I just wanted to see some different historical documents or religious documents, and we'll compare some more next week. If that's okay, you guys like continuing in Veracity and seeing about Veracity? Because eventually we'll get to the Torah, but I have a little more classes available since we're in a